to Clarity Quote to Cash podcast. I'm Karina, your host today. My guest is Gonzalez, principal pricing scientist at Pricefx. He has over 15 years of experience in pricing. He has worked on various pricing solutions. During that time, the most important lessons he had learned is that a person would rather live with a problem they cannot solve than accept a solution they cannot understand. In today's episode, we have a special focus on pricing AI. While AI can offer valuable insights and support in pricing, it's crucial to recognize that it's just one tool among many. Pricing problems can be complex, and there are various factors beyond pure data analysis that come into play. Why AI cannot be a silver bullet for every pricing problem? Let's find out today. Ed, you've had an extensive career in pricing, working on data-driven pricing solutions for numerous customers. Could you share a bit about your experience and how you've seen AI play a role in solving pricing problems?
Yeah, Karina, now that's a very loaded question, right? There's a lot of things associated with that question. So I'm going to take a step back and really build up my general philosophy when it comes to data-driven solutions. Because ultimately, when people are looking for pricing solutions that they call quote unquote AI, a lot of times what they're really saying is use my data in a way that gives me more information in terms of how I could do things perhaps a little bit better. That's been my experience in terms of what customers actually mean. And one of the things I want to do in this podcast, throughout this podcast here, is talk about perhaps moving away from all these buzzwords and moving a little bit more towards practicality. What is it that we're actually trying to do at the end of the day? Now, because when people talk about AI, that's a very broad topic. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm going to take a step back and kind of give perhaps a little bit of background in terms of how I developed my philosophy. So initially, just growing up, I've always loved mathematics. I love mathematics. I always thought it was a puzzle. I always thought it was something that we could actually get a solution for, and it was kind of fun. I wasn't necessarily that great at it. I was okay, but I enjoyed it. And in order for me to keep up with, I would say, the better students in the class, I had to break it down to its simplest parts. I had to make it logical for myself. Now, the reason I tell that story is because I bring that with me in the way I approach problems today. When we talk about any problem or that I'm working on, is I want to break it down to its smallest parts. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the customer's business, and then from there, really mapping it to how the solution should actually, how a solution, data-driven solution, should actually work to solve the problems they're looking to solve. Now, and the reason I tell that story is because when we talk about an AI solution, I believe that's the first step anybody should do. It's not. Let's talk about an algorithm. Give me a magical box that's going to solve all my problems? No. Let's talk about your business. Let's talk about your business. Let's talk about what you're looking to solve, and then from there, let's really try to figure out what is it that's going to make sense to actually solve the problems you're looking to solve. What are the data-driven techniques that we could potentially use to solve your problem? And to me, that's the real secret of AI. AI is, like I said, it's a little bit of a buzzword, but what are we trying to do at the end of the day? We're trying to solve problems in a practical manner, in a way that makes sense for our customers, or for whoever has this pricing problem at the end of the day. And in order to do that, we have to, from my perspective, I move away from this notion of AI or any other buzzwords and say, keep it simple. As what are you trying to do? And then from there, I could provide some recommendations in terms of how you want to move forward. But and one last thing here is, a lot of times people think that AI, they should just accept it as is. Any data-driven solution, they should accept it as is. But I disagree. I feel that you should understand how a data-driven solution is going to help your business, how it's going to help the problem that you're trying to solve. If you can't understand that concept, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to accept the recommendations coming out of that solution, yet alone explain it to other people within your organization. So when it comes to basically my philosophy of AI, it's really just that. It's really, let's not focus so much on AI. Let's focus on your problem. And then from there, we can talk about what are the best ways to solve that solution. So hopefully that gives you an indication in terms of how I approach the general topic.
Thank you for sharing everything. And I like your story, how your passion to mathematics makes you realistic in terms of understanding that AI is just another way, another approach to help business to solve some problems. And it's, of course, not all in one hit. It won't help every customer. And today we will try to deep dive in this topic and understand where is the right situation to apply AI and where is it better to stay with the previous just programming approaches and ways. So my first question will be about prescriptive pricing models. They are designed to provide recommendation based on historical data. But what happens when there is a limited data set or historical data are not available in the amount that is required for pricing situation? What can business reasonably expect from pricing AI in such cases?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something we encounter all the time. And quite honestly, the answer is the obvious answer, the answer that you might think. If you're trying to use the data to basically give you an indication of how you should move forward, but you've never done it in the past, then how good do you think the recommendations are going to be for the future? Right? The idea there is not so much that this is something magical is going to go on, that it could predict anything moving on in the future. Actually, it's going back to what I said earlier. It's really understanding what you have historically, basically aligning it up with what you're trying to accomplish moving forward, and then deciding if certain things should be solved using a data-driven solution, or perhaps say, look, this is something that we just don't have a lot of historical data on. Perhaps we should start off something a little bit simpler in these fringe cases. Like, because a lot of times, most of your historical data, they're very good at basically giving you an indication of what you should do for what I call the foundational elements of your business, things that you basically sell all the time, things that you're doing all the time. However, the fringe things, the things that you don't do very often, the historical data sometimes is not that great to give you a recommendation. And to that end, we should think about this logically. Like I said before, right? You always have to take a step back and say, well, how are things going to fit? What is the right logic to use here? And quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with using something very simple for a small part of your business, right? If something's very specialized, then perhaps it does need a specialized process that is not necessarily supported, or not, I want to say supported, but driven solely by your historical data. It should be a mix of perhaps some user knowledge as well as basically some data where it makes sense to leverage it. But you have to understand the limitations of leveraging the historical data to actually move forward with a solution in situations where you don't have historical data that accurately represents what you would like to do in the future. And I think this is something that a lot of people get wrong. To be quite frank, to be frank with you, right? It's because people come to the table and they say, I have this AI algorithm I'm going to use, and it's going to be great. It's going to do everything for me. But really, it's not, right? It's only going to do what it's supposed to do. And if you can't map it correctly to the parts of your business where it's actually going to give you a good, valuable insights, then you're setting yourself up for perhaps disappointment and maybe even failure. And those are the things you have to be careful for at the end of the day.
Yes, very good explanation, because sometimes customer feels that even without a good pricing strategy in place, AI can solve any their problems. And at the same time, we have to consider that only in the way when we have a clear data, we can expect a good results in terms of pricing recommendations.
So let me touch on that a little bit, because a lot of people have this perception that the data has to be perfect. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be generally okay, right? To give you a good indication in terms of what's going on. My point previously was, if you have basically pockets of your business where you haven't really done things historically, it's going to be very difficult for a generalized data-driven solution to give you a good recommendation for that part of your business moving forward. Not to say it can't help or assist. However, you have to take a step back and really understand that some of the limitations of the approach relative to what I'm calling the smaller niche parts of your business. And to me, that's really the practical part of AI. I consider myself a practitioner, right? It's not so much that I'm over there talking about all these mathematical formulas, because to me, that's almost to a certain extent irrelevant to a daily user of these solutions. It's more what is the general logic driving these solutions, and how does it fit into your business? And perhaps in certain situations, how it may not be that great of a fit. And in those situations, let's talk about other things we could do, because almost always, I would say 99% of the time, there's always things that could be done to automate your processes, to make them better, right? Even for situations that perhaps a little bit more difficult you haven't seen in the past.
Thank you for explanation. Now I will also know was my mistake. Okay, so next question will be about structure of data models and how can business effectively structure their data models to support pricing AI. Are there any best practices that you can share with our audience?
So, you're asking all the good questions, all the questions that I always hear, because a lot of people have concerns. My organization is not ready for AI. We're not organized. Our data is just not in place. We have data all over the place. And that might be true. But the real question is, what is the base data that you need to get something going? Right? If you have that mentality that how could I leverage the data to improve my processes, not to be perfect, because by the way, you're never going to be perfect, right? It's a process to get there. It takes time to basically perfect your process. So if you're really focused on improving your processes, well, the idea there is, leverage the information that you have readily available, and even something as simple as your base historical transactions. Simple as that. If you have that organized, you can get insights that are going to be valuable to your business. I mean, I'm talking about the base stuff. Who's your customer? Who's your product? What product did you sell them? How much did they buy? What was their price? What was their cost? If you have that piece of information, you can start deriving certain information that might help you improve your processes. Things such as even simple things such as classifying your customers by their historical revenue spend, right? Large, medium, small. Segmenting these customers into these clusters, that's already valuable insight that perhaps you don't have. That base information alone that I just explained can also give something like what products are most important for certain customers. Maybe a customer spending 50% of their overall spend with you on one product. That's an indication that that's very important to them. You might have a different pricing strategy for that customer as opposed to somebody who spends 1% of their overall revenue spent on that product. Right. So, and those are just a few examples of things that could be derived out of your base data. So my main point here, Karina, is not so much, look, get all your data organized and and we'll give you a great solution. I'm saying start with what you have, start with your base data. If that's the only thing you have available, from there, we can start constructing really informative metrics and analysis to give you a data-driven solution, at least to start with. As you get yourself organized and you can start enhancing your overall data structures to perhaps get even more insight, but that shouldn't stop you from moving forward with a data-driven solution with your base data.
I personally have a quote which is like, great is enemy of good.
Correct.
And sometimes there is no the right moment to start, and if you will wait for this right moment, you will never start. So basically, if you're considering to start implementation of pricing AI, you just need to start from something, just understand what is the best product where you want to try, and if you have data with what to try this approach, then you can start from proof of concept, from something small, and then just get the results and moving forward with all implementations.
Yeah, and to your point, if you have base data, there's always something you do. That basic data I just described, there's a lot of things actually that you could do to improve your historical pricing practice. And it's interesting you mentioned that quote, because I use a variation of that quote fairly often when I'm talking to people that I'm working with. It's that perfect is the enemy of progress, right? If people say, I want a perfect solution, if you want a perfect solution, we'll be here for 20 years, right? But in terms of you're really trying to progress your pricing practices, right? We could basically construct a timeline and an implementation plan that gets you there in a relatively quick fashion. And that starts your pricing journey. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand. People say, "Oh, wait, this AI is going to solve all my problems," but really, it's a journey. And if you think about it that way, if you have that mind frame, and that I think that really helps you really understand what you're trying to do, not only with currently, but in terms of your long-term plan. This is basically something that's going to evolve over the course of time and get better and better and better.
Right, I agree. So I before this episode, I read your blog posts,
Mhm.
and we will also attach links to these blogs in our description for podcast. But right now, I would like to discuss with you one of the recent posts. You mentioned clear box and black box artificial intelligence. Could you explain what these terms mean and how they relate to pricing?
So yeah, so first of all, thank you for reading my post. I hope you enjoyed it. I encourage all the
Yes,
listeners
I
to
do.
take a look as well too, because if you like my general philosophy in terms of what I'm saying right now, I think I dig into that just a little bit more in more detail. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But when it comes to clear box and black box, so in general, when people say clear box, it's basically they're defining a mechanism or a structure that's very understandable that you could explain it to somebody and they say, oh, I kind of see the general logic going on here. I understand what's going on with the data. I could explain it to people in my organization if they ask me to. Now, the other end of the spectrum is black box. Now, black box are these mathematical algorithms or approaches, or let's just call them data-driven approaches, where you get a result, but you don't know why, right? Because the inner workings of the mechanism to generate the results are so complicated that they're almost impossible to describe. Things like you probably heard everybody's. I think at this point, right? One of the latest approaches is neural networks. Everybody's heard of them. I don't think a lot of people know what they actually are. But ultimately, at the end of the day, and I don't think we're going to dive into what they actually are in this session, but at the end of the day, that's a black box approach. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible in most cases, to understand why that approach gave you a recommendation given the data that you inputted. Now, that's where you have to be aware in terms of where you are in your pricing journey as an organization. Are you at a place where you use data-driven solutions in the past, where you're comfortable with the notion that an automated process is going to give you something, a recommendation that you should move forward with without a lot of supporting information? I would say most of the companies I work with, they're not there yet. They're in the early parts of their pricing journey or in the journey of using data-driven solutions. They're barely starting to scratch the surface. They're basically saying, I've never done it before. I want more automated process. I want to get inside out of my data. How do I do it? To jump directly from that point, from having nothing to a black box approach, is a very, very difficult thing for an organization, right? Because now you're basically going to Karina and say, Karina, you should use this because I said so. This machine said so. A bunch of microchips told you to do so. Is that going to be very compelling? I would say probably not.
No,
Yeah,
no.
but if you go back and if you could use a more clear box approach to say, you know what, we have a more structured way. We're actually segmenting our customers by these three characteristics, and from there we're able to construct a lot of, let's say, 200 different segments where we can be very targeted. In every segment, I can explain to you what are the customers in each segment, and I can explain to you what are the prices that are being generated in each of these segments, if and the reasons why they're being generated, if we choose to go to that level of detail. Right, that I think is much more comforting to an organization that's barely getting started with a data-driven solution. Once you as an organization start getting used to the idea that, wow, data-driven insights at a granular level could be very beneficial to my organization, that's when you may consider taking the leap to a black box approach, right? But until you get to that point, until you have some experience really understanding what a data-driven solution looks like and really justifying that to your organization and getting that adoption of these automated recommendations from your organization, I would recommend, my recommendation is always stay away from the black box approaches until you get past that first step.
Yes, I would say that by nature, people, we are afraid about something which we are not, we don't know where this information comes from. I can provide as an example also communication with ChatGPT and with Bing. Bing by default send information with references, links where it took this information. And ChatGPT, of course, you can ask like where exactly, what is the source of this information that you are answering me with. But when I just get this information, I always try to turn on my critical thinking and understand, okay, why this information comes? Should I use it or should I search additionally somewhere? Is it reliable source? Like specifically coming from the previous experience as a business analyst, and we also always challenge with questions our customers. Is it the right information? Do you need exactly this implementation? Same way with black boxes, it's always coming to way when we are asking, should I rely on this information? So let's try to find a balance between clear box and black box approach. Can you please provide some advices for business?
Sure, absolutely. I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I'm going to reinforce what I was trying to say is, number one, if you have not really started on your data-driven journey with respect to setting a pricing strategy in a more automated way using a data-driven process, you should definitely start with a clear box approach. Why? Because you're introducing a new concept to an organization. You want to get everybody comfortable with the general idea. It's interesting when you were in your example, you're saying, look, if I see something that I'm not very knowledgeable in, but it sounds a little suspicious, I want to get more information in terms of where it's coming from.
Yes.
Imagine if your job and your livelihood depended on that, right? Because that's what we're asking our pricing organizations to do, saying, look, take this as is, and your job depends on it. Are you going to do it? It's very, very difficult sell, right? It's a much easier solution where you say, here's what your job depends on. Look at all this opportunity or the potential opportunity that we're providing you based on the data. This is the reasons why we believe it. And then from there, you can make a decision and say, wow, that makes sense. That I see why we're doing that. Let's try to get that additional, let's move in that direction. That's a much easier conversation. Now it's almost like and it's funny because I guess your example was in relation to technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the fear of the unknown. But I mean, just
Yes.
we as human beings, that's just our nature in everything. I don't care if you're in a new house, in a dark room, and people are asking you to go around the corner, right? You might be a little bit uneasy about it and say, wait a minute, why are you asking me to go around that corner in that dark house? I don't know what's over there. Why are you asking me to do this? So, in just that basic idea that, look, at the end of the day, we're human beings. We have certain
Mm-hmm.
ways that we think. We have certain ways that we interact with any kind of recommendations that people are giving us to do. So let's not lose sight of that when we're actually doing a data driven solution. That's one of the things that I like to kind of point out here is the things that we do as human beings are things that are still going to go with us in every decision we make, especially if it's associated with our jobs and our livelihood.
Yes, and I would say that it's even good because we can challenge the results and think about one more time the questions that we ask and response that we received. So it's anyway good.
Oh, I love it. Look, and just kind of piggyback on that is you bring up a great point right now. Is you could challenge the structure, you could challenge a clear box mechanism, and you should, right? Because ultimately, what are we trying to do as pricing teams, as pricing organizations? We're trying to implement strategy. If the clear box approach is not aligned with your strategy, of course you should call it out. Even in a clear box strategy, you should not rely solely on the mathematical insight. You use the mathematical insight to guide you to make sure that it's to help you align your data-driven solution with your strategy. But ultimately, don't lose that power. That power is yours. You're basically deciding what's best for your business. You've been doing this for the past 15, 20, 25 years. Well, to say that your knowledge is irrelevant, that would be the wrong approach. Always use your knowledge with respect to basically the insights given by any data-driven solution to really drive your pricing strategy at the end of the day, because that's what you're doing with any data-driven solution.
Right. You know, even though we have still fears to unknown, but right now AI, especially this year, it's like buzzword everywhere. In every solution, we need AI. Every company just come. We attended a conference months ago, and every customer they came. What do you provide with AI? And people think that this is like silver bullet. It can solve any organizational problems. And refer back to your blog post. You mentioned that AI cannot be a silver bullet for every pricing problem, and I definitely agree with you. So could you elaborate on that and provide some examples where AI might not be an ideal solution?
Yeah, so definitely. So first of all, this is a very important topic, an interesting topic. So there's a lot of things you touched on, and I'll try to remember everything to try to give to touch all these points. Number one, people have to understand within organizations that data-driven solutions or AI solutions, a lot of times they fail, right? They fail. And the reason for that is because there's certain assumptions based on the thing that you just give somebody data. They're going to push a couple of buttons and everything's going to come out perfectly. I mean, you can go ahead and Google it. You can even use ChatGPT, like you said, right? And ask it what percentage of data science projects fail, for especially in particular for pricing. You're going to see a very high percentage, something like 80 to 90%. And personally, I believe that's low. Why? Because I think, from my experience, a lot of people that I've seen do data-driven solutions for pricing, sometimes they take a step back. They take this mentality that AI, there's this magical thing called AI, and this is going to give me something. It's going to be beautiful. This is going to work great, right? But as I said before, AI doesn't know your strategy. It doesn't know what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. It doesn't know that necessarily that your products that you don't sell very often, your strategy is to get more margin out of it, right? Because if you haven't done it in the past, how's it going to recommend to do that in the future? Like those are, and that's an example of just a very simple example that I run into all the time. Is we could use the data historically, but it's going to tell you the products that you sell 1 or 2 times a year. You should get the same margins for that. You should get the same margin for those products that you're getting for the products that you sell every day. I would say that's silly, right? Those are basically high margin products. Those are things that you should actually that are specialized product that people are typically willing to pay a lot more than the more standardized commodity products. Right? That's where you have to layer basically your knowledge on top of the data, on top of the output to make sure that something actually makes sense at the end of the day. So,
Right.
so that would be the first thing I would say in terms of really people are looking to take the AI journey and thinking that's going to be a silver bullet. It's number one, well, just look at the historical data, right? It's funny, we're trying to use data to establish our pricing process. Well, look at the historical data to see what it tells you in terms of success of AI projects, and try to understand why. And the reason that if you start digging a little bit deeper, the reason that most of them fail is because they don't take into consideration some of the things that I talked about before. People have this perception that you just give some mathematical genius some data, and they're just going to give you something that's perfect. And as I said before, that's just not the case. And I actually have a real story. I mean, perhaps a little shocking that I was previously at an organization where they were talking about basically leveraging a product recommendation engine to do certain for a given workflow. And the person running the initiative, because I asked him, okay, so how does this work? What's the general logic? Give me like an overview. He's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the logic is. It works. You could plug in anyone in there and it's going to work. And I just walked away thinking, now that's a project that's doomed to fail, right? Because you have no indication in terms of what is the mechanism that's driving the recommendation at the end of the day. Is that recommendation, is that logic aligned with your business? Is it basically, is it going to give you something that makes sense to your sales rep? Is it going to say, okay, when somebody buys a carton of milk, they should buy a car as well? Well, that makes no sense, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go to the store, get a gallon of milk, I'm not going to come home with a car as well, right? So those are kind of things that we have to kind of think about and saying, what is the logic? What are the constraints around this? How do we know that this is actually going to give us something that makes sense? So this notion, and you touched on another thing in terms of buzzwords. I know a lot of, I would say, people are fascinated by the notion of AI because there's some really great examples out there, right? In terms of things where it works really well, and even ChatGPT is very impressive in terms of what it's doing from a general perspective. However, just as there's some very good examples of how it works well, there's some very good examples how it doesn't. Right? In referencing my article, there's a video that I share a link to, and it shows multiple examples of how AI, if you let it run crazy, it will, and it's just going to give you things that don't make sense. So that's my main point here. I'm not saying, look, I mean, the reason I'm here is because I believe in data-driven solutions. I believe that you get information or data to make your processes better. However, if you don't do that in a logical, practical manner, you're setting yourself up for failure. And a lot of times, once you go down that route of introducing AI or something deemed as AI to your organization that has failed, trying to do that again is going to be much more difficult. So those are the things that you have to keep in mind when you're moving forward. Keep a practical perspective on your rollout and what you're trying to accomplish and why you believe a certain thing called AI is going to work for you.
Insightful. And I also encourage our audience to go and read your blog post and also reference to this TED Talk video. I also watched it. They will find a lot of answers which problem AI can solve and which not. And also, I think that with this episode, we can bring the light a bit more on what problems AI can solve and what not. You provided a lot of practically good examples. And I also want to add on top of it that at the time when I studied at the university, my physics teacher, he said always, it's not a magic, it's a physics.
There we
And
go.
right now, I would say that it's not a magic, it's just AI, it's just another approach. So understand your data, understand your strategy, understand the problems that you would like to solve, business challenges that you want to address, and then choose the right technology and use it. My last question, and I usually go with this question at the end of every podcast episode, because I'm personally like futuristic person. I want to see what will come in the future. So how do you see the future of AI in pricing? What trends or developments are excite you right now?
So yeah, I'm going to answer that in a more general way, right? Because as I alluded to before, I think we've all, most of us, or maybe perhaps a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, we've all seen the Terminator movies, right? Where we have the Skynet robots, and they're so intelligent that they could do everything like a human being. So with respect to pricing, we're a long way from that. Right? That's not going to happen within the next 5 to 10 years. That's perhaps 50 years down the line, maybe. When I'm not around anymore. However, the notion of basically making things more intelligent, that is a very real prospect. That is something that is going to occur. I see that's going to happen in pricing as we move forward. Researching different approaches here. Now, but to basically step back and really relate that to what I said before, it's a journey that's important, right? Because in order to actually get to a place where things seem to be smart, where things to be almost automated and almost magical, that doesn't happen overnight. That is really a process that you have to basically leverage, tune, and learn from your processes or your data-driven solutions to see how you can improve them continuously to get to a place where things become a little bit more magical, a little bit more automated, and the human interaction is limited. Not to say that there's a lot of human interaction with a clear box approach. Not to say that. However, there is, I would say, much more influence that you might need in a clear box approach, as opposed to when you start moving more towards the black box approaches down the line, where you have a little bit more confidence that the system is going to do what it's going to do. So I do see that there's a path here. And I just, even though I'm a big fan of clear box approach, I believe that's the first step that should be done. And that's without a doubt, that's the case. However, as people start getting more used to the clear box approaches, they're going to start evolving to these black box approaches. But as long as they keep in mind the things that I've talked about before, making sure that you're tailoring the algorithms to be aligned with your strategy, making sure that when you're taking the journey, whatever you're doing to be perhaps a little bit more black box, that black box is still aligned with what you're trying to do. Then I think the organizations are eventually going to start moving in that towards that type of methodology. That's not going to happen over 2-3 years. Right? This is basically a 10, 15-year journey from my perspective, right? Because basically you as an organization have to be committed to learning, to developing, to leveraging these technologies and doing it in a practical manner. So, and some organizations are willing to do that. They're willing to say, yes, we have a long-term vision. This is something that's important to us. We will invest in this. Others would say, no, we don't have that deep of pocketbooks. We need something a little bit more structured. So if you're somebody that does have, I would say, larger pockets, then great. I think I could see that perhaps down the line with a good amount of investment, you might be able to get to that magical place. However, if you're not, I would say that you would have to almost wait to the approaches are a little bit more solidified, they're a little bit more proven out, because that's a real important point here. I guess what I'm trying to say is when it comes to black box approaches, they have to be proven. They have to be shown that they're going to work. And are you in a position financially, and even from internally, you're in a position to really test out the hypothesis that they're going to work magically. Most organizations are not. Some are, right? So that's why I think the organizations with the deeper pockets, they might lead the way. However, all the other organizations will learn from that. And that is going to take time. So I think it's going to be more of a 10 to 15-year journey. But eventually, I think we'll start getting to this place where things seem a little bit more magical. However, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not there today. And you have to keep that in mind as you're really looking to implement a data-driven solution.
Personally, I'm with you in this idea that it's a long time journey. And of course, we will need to have satisfaction on all this journey, and we will get the first results even after months and a year of using the AI in pricing. But also last news, specifically this year, how fast people started to adopt AI solutions. I'm thinking that maybe we will find something in this journey also how we can evaluate and increase speed of implementation, and maybe generate additional data which will help and support to train our model. So probably maybe this approximate estimation will even become the reality faster.
So you articulated it a little better than I did, because I think you alluded to something that's very important that I tried to do. I don't know if I did a great job, but the idea that in order to get to this place where the black box solutions are very practical, you have to train, you have to invest, you have to retry stuff. You have to accept that you're going to fail. And that takes a big commitment, a lot of times a big investment from organizations. That was my point I was trying to make earlier. And if you're an organization that doesn't have those deep pockets to do that investment, I don't think that's a problem, right? You don't have to be a research institution. You could wait back. You could still incorporate your data-driven solutions that are more practical, more clear box, that's going to give you a lot of value until these other black box approaches are more proven out in the pricing space. Once they're proven out, then great. And, then you can make a decision if it makes sense to actually leverage them yourself.
Right. Ed, before we wrap up, do you have any final words or advices for our audience, for our listeners, how they can better navigate the world of pricing AI?
I would say, are you a fan of The Wizard of Oz? Have you ever seen that movie, The Wizard of Oz?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, well, I encourage you to take a look at, or go look at the movie. But
I will watch.
it's basically a guy who claims to be a wizard, but ultimately the people find out that he's just behind a curtain and doing all these magical tricks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, be careful for wizards, right? Be careful for people that claim that there's magical solutions, that things are just going to work out because they're throwing around buzzwords. I would say, go a little bit deeper and challenge them to say, what do you mean? What do you mean that AI is going to help our organization? Give me a more concrete example how it's going to help my specific pricing scenario, right? And to me, that gives you a better opportunity to really leverage solutions that make sense. Unless, of course, you believe in wizards.
Yes. And I would add also that literacy in terms of AI is also very important. So people just don't need to follow these buzzwords, but ask, what does it mean? How does it work? And by understanding, then they will come into place. Either they need this solution, or maybe they should try something else for their specific business problems.
Exactly. And I think that's well said. And, if you run into somebody who can't explain, who's trying to promote something that they can't explain, I would be very cautious of that individual.
Right. Well, thank you so much to you, Ed, for being with us today. It was truly a pleasure to me to have you with us as a guest, and I hope that our listeners found this conversation as informative and enjoyable as I did. As always, we're just one click away. Please contact us at CLARITY.SHOW. Thank you for listening, and see you at the next episode.
Thank you very much, Karina. Thank you all.
Thank you.